Thanks for joining us. I'm Megan Roberts. Police have recovered the body of a person who was missing after a vehicle went through the ice in Lake Lebarge, Yukon. 3 people were in the vehicle when the incident happened on Saturday. 2 were able to escape. 1 was not. Maria Tobin has the latest.
It happened at the south end of Lake Lebarge, located about 30 minutes from the downtown core. RCMP say they responded to a vehicle that drove into open water around 1 a.m. Saturday, just 2 kilometers from the shoreline. 3 people were in the vehicle at the time of the incident. Police say 2 occupants were able to exit the vehicle safely, but 1 did not make it out. British Columbia RCMP underwater recovery team was called in for assistance. They conducted a search for the 3rd occupant, who they found deceased Sunday afternoon. Officials say no further details about the death will be released out of respect for the family. The investigation is ongoing. Maria Tobin, CBC News, Whitehorse.
A trial into sexual assault and assault allegations against a former Yellowknife City Councillor is wrapping up after nearly 2 weeks of testimony. Robin Williams is facing 14 charges. He is pleading not guilty to all of them. Not guilty to all of them. The identity of the woman who accused him is protected by a publication ban. The Crown and defense delivered closing statements at the Yellowknife courthouse today. The trial will resume on Wednesday, when the jury will be tasked with deciding on a verdict. A court case in the Yukon will have major implications for the territorial government. It's over changes made to some budgets by finance department officials. Chris Windier reports.
A complex dispute between the Yukon government and several independent agencies is heading to court. The case includes the Child and Youth Advocate and the Ombudsman's Office. They are classed as independent offices of the Legislative Assembly. The idea is for them to be at arm's length from the government. That's because their job is to examine and sometimes criticize government policies and decisions. Historically, their budgets have been approved by a committee of the Legislative Assembly and sent to the Finance Department to be included in the spring budget. But last fall, the department decided to edit those figures and granted the offices less money than approved the committee. The offices and the committee itself complained to Finance Minister Sandy Silver. He said, effectively, too bad, we have the power to do this, citing a legal opinion from 2008. So last week, the Ombudsman and the Child and Youth Advocate filed a petition in Yukon Supreme Court. They're seeking what's called a writ of mandamus. Basically, that's when a judge orders the government to do something set out in law. The offices are concerned that the new process basically puts them at risk of retaliation from the government. Issue a finding the government doesn't like, they'll slash your budget. That's the fear anyway. The government has declined all interview requests while this matter is before the courts. They've also declined to share a copy of that 2008 legal opinion. None of the petition's claims have been tested at trial. Chris Windier, CBC News, Whitehorse.
It's a big concern across the Northwest Territories, fire smarting, and whether enough is being done. The government of the Northwest Territories has announced new additional funding that will go towards fire prevention and some future upkeep. Jocelyn Chappelle has that story.
Will $10.3 million be enough for NWT communities to carry out wildfire prevention projects over the next 5 years? Adam McNabb, the Director of Protective Services for Fort Smith, hopes it will be.
Especially when we're looking at doing these big projects to initially remove vegetation, but then the ongoing maintenance of those fire breaks is going to be challenging.
McNabb says they are continuing on existing work, cutting down wildfire fuel. That includes removing trees with flammable cones, needles, or scales in favor of trees that shed their leaves annually. McNabb says the extra money coming in is good news, especially when they're looking at finalizing their updated community plan.
As part of that, we're identifying fuel management projects that we'll be using new Fire Smart funding to carry out. And we're going to be looking at beginning to put out RFPs and tenders over the coming months.
McNabb says while government funding and large projects are important, so is people cleaning up their backyards. He says the department is happy to help with that ahead of wildfire seasons.
We're more than willing to come out into the community and conduct a fire smart assessment on individual properties and help folks to improve the fire smart aspects of their own home and property.
$7.7 million of the funding is coming from the federal government, while the GNWT is contributing $2.5 million. How the funding is going to be allocated is still unclear. At the announcement, the GNWT said the goal is to develop regional committees. Those committees would then be responsible for dividing funds over different fire smart initiatives. Jocelyn Chappelle, CBC News, Yellowknife.
The Yukon is seeing more and more health practitioners leaving the territory. In the last month, Yukon has lost at least 3 doctors. One of them is an orthopedic surgeon. Dr. Adam McIntyre shared an exit letter last week in which he decries systemic underfunding in surgical services. The Yukon Medical Association's president says the territory needs to invest in infrastructure to avoid more departures.
We've already seen some improvement. There's an increase in beds at the hospital, which would have resulted in fewer cancellations for surgeries. What we would really need to see is an ongoing expansion in the number of beds so that we can keep up with our population, and also an increase in the operating rooms.
The Yukon government says patients currently on the surgical wait list will be transitioned to new surgeons or referred to appropriate specialists to minimize any disruption in care. Low enrollment, high costs, and a need to modernize. Aurora College says that's why it decided to close all its community learning centres. There are 19 of them across the Northwest Territories. The announcement was made last week. The CBC's Nadir Hashmi has more on the closures and the reaction.
Aurora College says the decision to close down its community learning centers was difficult but necessary. The low enrollment numbers did not justify the high operating costs.
The current model of delivery was really unsustainable, untenable, and unmanageable.
Another college representative says enrollment kept declining with only a few students last year.
Running 19 centers with 19 instructors for 22 students in 19 communities is a pretty inefficient way of doing business. So we're saying, let's find a better way of doing it.
Hanley says the college will operate the centers until June 30th. Meanwhile, Hanley says they'll develop a restructuring plan and a new delivery model where online will play a big part. But Tuktoyaktuk Mayor says he's concerned and the closures will be a huge loss to the community. He says online upgrading programs or those offered in larger communities wouldn't work well for many in Tuktoyaktuk.
I don't think it's for everybody. I think that, going forward somewhere down the line, maybe that's the way everything's going to be. But having something in a community and being able to do it hands-on, is always better, I think. And I think it will be a huge loss.
Elias also says they rely on the facility to fill a number of needs, like housing high school students or programs like Makerspace. He says the facility has been an asset for more than just course upgrading. Aurora College says the buildings are owned by the government of Northwest Territories and that it's the government that will need to decide what to do with them. For the current employees working in these centers, the union president says their futures look bleak.
There's not a lot of jobs in these small communities if they were wanting to stay in the community. And I'm sure for each and every one of them, there's a lot of uncertainty, and it will be very hard on them and their families.
Tansom says 47 positions will be affected, 31 of which are currently filled. She says she was shocked by the news and is concerned about its impact on employees.
I'm upset for them. It's their livelihood, a lot of them.
Tansom says the union has sent letters to MLAs and leaders and will continue to advocate against the cuts. Nadir Hashmi, CBC News, Yellowknife.
The Kanwipita National Inuit Health Survey team is going to every community in Nunavut, speaking to Inuit about their health and wellness. And every answer will help us as Inuit determine our own priorities for a healthier future. Together, we will answer the question, Kanwipita, how are we? Find out when we're coming to your community. Learn more at qnihs.ca.
In your once stolen vehicle in West Africa.
jumped in the car, and then off they went.
I want my truck back. 300% increase in auto theft.
300%.
It's organized crime, well-financed.
They are selling vehicles that are insecure.
They're working on it.
We hear that from a lot of automakers.
Yeah.
We think we found your car.
Oh my goodness.
This is CBC North on your smart TV, because CBC News is now streaming local. Local news and weather on your connected TV or favorite device. CBC News North, streaming now.
It makes sense that they get a larger share, or does it?
Welcome to the Greenbelt.
All of this, just single detached homes.
Yes.
What do we know? I think we can explain.
About that with Andrew Chang.
Detective Constable, let's go.
Don't discount her instincts. She'll follow them with or without you.
Is that right? Police, open up!
Show yourself!
In my experience, it's best to know what she's thinking.
The number of Justices of the Peace, or JPs, in Nunavut has been declining over the past few years. Since 2016, there's been a decrease of roughly 40%. That's according to numbers from the Nunavut Justice Department. JPs regularly conduct first appearance and bail hearings, among other matters. One civil lawyer in Iqaluit says the decline in JPs can cause delays in the justice system, and JPs hold crucial knowledge specific to their communities.
We see the impacts in terms of not being able to resolve situations of domestic violence because things circle round and round and round again. And people are released again and again, sometimes on unrealistic terms or conditions.
Nunavut's new Chief Justice, Susan Cooper, has previously stated that she plans to increase the amount of JPs in the territory. The Alberta government is planning the construction of a major road in the province's north, the extension of Highway 686. It's significant because it would link Fort McMurray and Grande Prairie. In a joint report, Dennis Coveton and Catherine Garrett show us how the new highway could be a game changer for northern Alberta from both sides of the road.
To get from Fort McMurray to Grande Prairie, the shortest route currently available is through Athabasca. It's 750 kilometers long, or about 7.5 hours. The proposed Highway 686 expansion will cut it down to 650 kilometers, or about 6.5 hours. So how is it coming along? I'm at the Fort Mac end of the highway, and my colleague Catherine Garrett is at the Grande Prairie end.
I'll explain how the Indigenous communities along the route are being included in the consultation process in a moment. Right now, key stakeholders say that this route would open up the north and make places like the Peace River oil sands more accessible.
Fort McMurray has been advocating for this highway for a long time, along the way navigating economic and safety issues and Indigenous treaty rights. As for economics,
that will fundamentally change our community puts us as a midpoint, a transit point from our heavy oil production in Lloydminster all the way through the 881 SAGD corridor and then west into Grande Prairie and the Peace Country where there's natural gas and agriculture and other things. So that highway, that interconnect is key to this region's potential diversification.
As for safety,
I was here in 2016. I witnessed the fire, the Beast. I was evacuated with my family. We need secondary routes for safety of all residents, including ourselves. So this is so important to us.
For Grande Prairie, it's a nice boost as well. They aren't leading the conversations, but they are happy to join to the table if needed.
Any connectivity opening the north will be of significant value. We know that this region is the economic engine of Alberta, and so having that connectivity to the rest of northern Alberta will have extreme value.
The Alberta government is working on plans with partnership between the Peerless Trout First Nation, Loon River First Nation, and the Big Stone Cree Nation.
We want to do this with the province moving forward. We want to work with them. And they've been diligent to give us this opportunity, moving forward. We have our elders that are very, totally involved in what we are trying to do here regarding moving forward. We're on the driver's seat, and this is very unique.
The partnership says the project has been split into 2 phases. Number 1, pave the existing 68 kilometers of highway between Red Earth Creek and Peerless Lake. They hope to have that halfway done by the end of this summer. Number 2, a final report to the province due by this summer. It will look at treaty rights, environmental impacts, animal crossings or sacred sites, and a historical review, as well as taking a look at construction supplies or any other concerns the nations along the route may have. It doesn't take away the province's duty to consult the nations themselves, but the partnership feels that by having this report, it will make the province's process more efficient.
When it was announced in April 2023, the province committed $2 million to First Nations for coordination and up to $5 million for pre-engineering work. In a statement, the Minister of Transportation says most of this year will be taken up by preliminary engineering, including geotechnical work. The entire project is expected to take about 5 years to complete. In Fort McMurray, Dennis Cofton, CBC News.
Catherine Garrett, CBC News, Grand Prairie.
Holocaust survivors and world leaders have gathered in Poland to mark the 80th anniversary of the liberation of Auschwitz. The Nazis murdered more than 1 million people at the concentration camp during the Second World War. Most were Jewish. Evan Dyer has more on the memorial.
80 years after liberation, the ranks of the survivors are thinner. And there's a sense that this will be the last major anniversary with any significant presence of people who survived Auschwitz. People like Miriam Ziegler, seen here on the day of liberation, who traveled to Poland from her home in Toronto.
I had a terrible day on Saturday going back to Auschwitz, seeing where I was separated from my family, from my mother and father and my aunt.
These grounds were the site of the largest Nazi concentration and extermination camp. Over nearly 4 years, more than 1 million men, women, and children, the majority Jewish, were murdered here.
I had to honor the people that had died there, that had no families. And the same, my family perished there. And to me, God left me. He left me for a reason. That's the way I feel.
The Soviet Red Army lost over 200 men killed in the battle to liberate the camp. The Russians were once honored guests at these events. The return of war to this region, with the Russian invasion of Ukraine nearly 3 years ago, led the Auschwitz-Birkenau Foundation to ban Vladimir Putin from this site. But Volodymyr Zelensky, the Jewish president of neighboring Ukraine, whose own family lost members in the Holocaust, traveled secretly to be here, among more than 30 heads of state and government. The message of never again, some said, felt particularly urgent. Dr. Leon Weintraub, who survived Auschwitz but lost his mother, said he was grieved to see the rise of a new far right and appealed to his audience to take seriously what the enemies of democracy preach. They really seek to implement those slogans, he warned. That's why many survivors say they feel a need to keep talking and teaching about what happened here.
If you don't nip them in the buds at the start when this happens, it's going to spread as we see now it is spreading. It's a curse.
50 survivors attended this commemoration compared to more than 300 a decade ago. Those who cheated death at this extermination camp are now approaching the end of their natural lives. And the message they sent today was, don't forget what happened here. Evan Dyer, CBC News, at Auschwitz-Birkenau.
Ceremonies across Canada are marking Holocaust Remembrance Day. Survivors living in Canada are sharing their stories to highlight why it's important to remember the horrors of the past. Sarah Levitt has more.
I think every survivor's duty is to do that.
The duty, George Reinitz says, to tell their story. The Holocaust survivor was just 12 years old when his family was taken to Auschwitz. Separated from his mother and sister on the first day, he never saw them again. His father also murdered.
I'm alone, I'm still 12 years old.
Now 93, the Montrealer has spent much of his life sharing accounts of his ordeal in the concentration camp and of all he lost.
And I think it's more important today than ever, because there's still a hate and racism and I never thought it's going to come back.
It's the 80th anniversary of liberation.
Across Canada, efforts are ongoing to ensure the Holocaust is not forgotten. A group of grade 6 students take in testimony from the daughter of a Holocaust survivor.
My dad was number 71572, my grandfather number 71595. And from that point forward, they were no longer a human being with an individual name and identity. They were simply a number in the Nazi regime.
Words that stick for some.
People in the world, even though you didn't do anything to hurt anybody else, some people are just so ruthless that they don't care.
It's important to learn so we can learn from our mistakes. There has been a lot of hate in the world recently, which is not good. So we have to learn more to love each other.
Something on display by those who braved the cold at the National Holocaust Monument in Ottawa.
Together, let us build the world where Auschwitz remains only a historical symbol and not a returning reality.
A prayer for peace, as important now as it was 80 years ago. Sarah Levitt, CBC News, Montreal.
Colombia says it will accept American military flights carrying deported migrants. It comes after a weekend showdown with the Trump administration, including a threat of punishing tariffs. Kate Fisher reports.
When Colombia refused to let U.S. military planes carrying its deported citizens land, with President Gustavo Petro objecting to the use of shackles and handcuffs on detainees, U.S. President Donald Trump threatened to put a 25% tariff on all Colombian imports into the U.S. Now, America is Colombia's biggest trading partner, and a social media spat erupted between the two countries' leaders. President Trump said that tariffs will be raised to 50% in a week, as well as threatening travel curbs and other unspecified sanctions. As Colombia agreed to back down, the White House claimed a victory for the Trump administration's uncompromising immigration policies, saying, "Today's events make clear to the world that America is respected again." At the same time, the Trump administration launched sweeping immigration raids in cities across the US. Nearly 1,000 people were arrested, according to Immigration and Customs Enforcement. White House border czar Tom Homan said that this was just the beginning.
Right now it's concentrating public safety threats, national security threats. That's a smaller population. So we're going to do this on priority base, as President Trump's promised, but as that aperture opens, there will be more arrests nationwide. The message needs to be clear. There's consequences for entering a country illegally.
But there was huge concern about the raids in Democratic-run cities like Chicago.
They're going after people who are law-abiding, who are holding down jobs, who have families here, who may have been here for a decade or 2 decades, and they're often our neighbors and our friends.
The weekend's events have shown how far President Trump is prepared to go to implement his campaign promises. And it's demonstrated to other countries the price of resisting migrant repatriations. Kate Fisher for CBC News, Washington.
Campers will soon be able to book spots in Jasper National Park for this summer. But before you make a reservation, there are some changes you need to know about. Acton Clarkin has those details.
So, you're ready to trade in your snowshoes for hiking boots and camp in Jasper National Park this summer. But things are different in the park this year after last season's devastating wildfire. Here's what you need to know before you go. Online bookings open January 28th for front country camping and the day after for backcountry. Sites are set to open in May, but not all will be. And those that are won't be taking as many campers as wildfire cleanup presses on.
There's lots of debris on the ground. There's lots of trees that have come down. We'll be removing trees from the campgrounds, as well as repairing a lot of the utilities infrastructure in the campgrounds itself. So the fire didn't just impact everything on the surface, it did impact utilities that were buried underground too.
Officials say if you're going to be hiking or biking trails, to be smart, as vegetation and soil has been weakened by flames.
Just not to linger in areas of fire-impacted areas, and to be very cautious when traveling through on the trails in high wind events or rain events and things like that, where the environment can change quite quickly.
I'm heading out to Whistler's Campground for a sneak peek, typically one of the park's busiest sites.
Our main concern is safety. So
Every area that we open for the public, we do it after an exhaustive assessment and an exhaustive remediation work.
These cabins are hot commodities. They're called authentics and sleep up to 6 people.
The heat from all these small trees catching fire, it was enough heat to melt all the siding of these authentic.
The majority of cabins in this area can still be booked, but others, like this one here, have suffered extensive damage and will need to be repaired before being open to the public. Popular campsites around here are in high demand, so you might not be able to book your first choice. Jean-Francois Boussière has been camping in this area for decades and owns a local camping and ski gear rental shop.
If you wait for the perfect spot on the most prime spot, it might take you years to get. But there's always availability somewhere, and every hike, every paddle has something special.
Parks Canada has extended this year's camping season, running from early May to late fall, to give people more booking flexibility. See you out there. Acton Clarkin, CBC News, Jasper.
And that is Northbeat for tonight. For news anytime, go to cbc.ca/North. Thank you for watching. I'm Megan Robbins. Have a good night.
How can any of this be fair?
Now you might think, hey, we just need more doctors, but that's not really it.
Russian scheme here.
Shows you where it starts, where it ends.
Were you really willing to risk that job?
Yes.
At Thunder Bay's favorite festival, Wake the Giant.
Ta-da! There it is.
Stream anytime. CBC News.
How many are inside?
From what we can tell, 3 bank employees and 6 patrons.
I'm gonna go in.
Fitz, you're so cute. You know, I did hostage negotiation training with the Parisian tactical unit, and I'm actually really good.
Okay. We go together. She's got FOMO. We're coming in!
This is CBC North on your smart TV, because CBC News is now streaming local. Local news and weather on your connected TV or favorite device. CBC News North, streaming now.
Being Black in Canada, a space for news, documentaries, arts, and more, celebrating a uniquely Canadian perspective on Black issues. With the cultural moments that matter to Black Canadians, visit cbc.ca/Being Black in Canada.
We're here to get it done! We're here to show up and show off!
Here we go, let's play the feud, Canadian style, here we go!
Family Feud Canada. Watch free on CBC Gem.